Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people seem to think that the world revolves around them. And in today's episode, guys, oh boy, nothing is more entitled than parents who tell their kids who they can or can't marry. Guys, the stories are crazy today, so I hope you enjoy them. Don't shake your heads too hard, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Okay, so I'm still baffled and horrified by what just happened, and my fiance is still fuming from it as I type this out on the bus ride home. So some woman thought that it was perfectly acceptable to ask him to dump me in exchange for her daughter. So first of all, a little backstory. I'm a 25-year-old female and my fiance is a 33-year-old male. We were having a little day out, as we don't have much time together as he works a lot. So this day out was a big thing to us. As neither of us drive, we had to take the bus to the city center and then had a little walk by the canal, stopping to get some lunch at a nearby pub. When it was starting to near mid-afternoon, we went back to the bus stop to take the same bus home. And this is where the problem starts. I was playing around on my phone, waiting for the bus, while my fiance just paces up and down the pavement as he can never sit still for long. We were going to be waiting a good 10 to 15 minutes before it was due. Now, I wasn't paying attention to what was going on, but soon I noticed a young woman coming up to my fiance. This was the entitled mother's daughter, and she looked to be no older than 17 or 18, and she was actually a decent person. Nothing like her mother. The daughter walks up to my fiance and says, hi, I'm sorry to bother you, but I think you're kind of cute. Would you mind if I gave you my number? My fiance tells her, oh, sorry, I'm actually engaged. The daughter goes red with embarrassment and says, okay, I'm sorry to bother you. Congratulations. I asked my fiance what that was about, and he briefly explained to me what happened, and I felt bad for the girl. Thinking that was the end of it, I went back to my phone, and my fiance went back to pacing. And that's when the entitled mother, Karen, comes over. Now, I also want to point out that the entitled mother and daughter were both Asian, and my fiance is half Asian, and this is relevant to the story later. The Karen comes up to my fiance and she begins her demands, saying, why did you turn my daughter down? Is she not pretty enough? Is that it? Huh? My fiance was shocked and just replies, excuse me? Karen goes on and says, my daughter told you she likes you, so why won't you go out with her? My fiance tries to explain and says, miss, I'm not interested in your daughter because I'm... She then cuts my fiance off mid-sentence and says, how could you turn her down without even getting to know her? Look at her. She's a beautiful young woman. She's smart and she would make a wonderful wife. Hearing that, my fiance is now shocked and backing away and says, whoa, lady, reel it in a bit. I'm not saying your daughter isn't any of those things, but I'm engaged to be married. Hearing that, Karen folds her arms and she scowls at my fiance, saying, your fiance won't know about this. Being engaged doesn't mean you're married. Just get to know my daughter and you'll see. You'll like her a lot more. My fiance says, well, for your information, ma'am, my fiance will know about this as she's standing right there. My fiance then points at me and I look at Karen and I gave her a timid wave. And she looked at me like she was looking at a cockroach. She then says, that's your fiance? You can't marry her. She's white. You need a strong, loving Asian woman like my daughter to take care of you. She then continued to scream how she thought I wasn't the right woman for my fiance, and I could see him start to clench his fist due to anxiety. She then says to him, do your parents even know about her? Like, if my son brought home a girl like her, I would be furious. Why would you on purpose want to dilute your Asian heritage? Do you not have any respect or pride? My fiance was obviously close to having a panic attack, so I slowly start to walk over to him to help him calm down. And before I got to him, he finally snapped and screams, listen, you don't have the right to tell me who I can or can't date or marry. Leave us alone. At that, the entitled mother just glares at us before stomping off. Her daughter apologized profusely for her mom's behavior before finally following after her. Oh boy, guys, well that was awkward. And newsflash, Karen, people can marry who they want. Like, who do you think you are, trying to tell a random person on the streets who they can or can't be with? And don't even get me started on the dilution of Asian heritage. Oh my goodness. With that said, guys, I don't know who would date, let alone marry the daughter after that ridiculous encounter right there. Because nobody wants to be attached to a crazy mother-in-law. So this post is about my entitled aunt. Anyways, I'd have been like 15 at the time of the story. Now, it's around this age that kids I knew would start getting their first boyfriends and girlfriends, nothing serious or anything. It was around this time that I started to realize that I wasn't attracted to girls. Now, I thought they were pretty, funny, smart, etc., but I never wanted a girlfriend. It didn't take me long to figure out that I was gay. I told my mom when we were watching a movie, and she just gave me a hug, and she told me she loved me no matter what. Anyways, a couple of weeks later, we had a family barbecue at my grandparents' house, and of course, my entitled aunt was there. Now here's one important note. I had my boyfriend with me. We'd been dating for just under a month at this point, and my entitled aunt was the only one who didn't know about this, for obvious reasons. With that said, we arrived at about 1 o'clock to help set the tables up for the rest of the family. The only other people there were my grandparents, my uncle, my uncle's wife, my older cousin, my entitled aunt, and her daughter. Everything was okay for a while, but of course, this didn't last. My grandpa was always welcoming to any friends or partners of the family, so he made sure that my boyfriend felt welcome. After about an hour, my grandpa, uncle, and boyfriend decided to head up to the attic to get some fishing gear for my boyfriend. That left myself, my mom, my grandma, my old cousin, and my entitled aunt. Uncle's wife had gone to the store. I was in the middle of doing something, so before my boyfriend left the room, he gave me a peck on the cheek, and then headed upstairs. And of course, my entitled aunt was staring. As soon as he left, my entitled aunt says, "Hey, what was that?" I ask her, "What was what?" She said to me, "Am I seeing things? Did your friend just kiss you?" Hearing that, I was internally screaming and said, yeah. She then says, "You're not gonna do something about that?" I ask her, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, you should knock him out for doing that. Be a man for once. Do you really want guys doing that to you, taking advantage of you like that?" I start to explain, but she cuts me off and says, "Boys don't kiss other boys. You know that. He's supposed to be your friend, and friends don't kiss each other on the cheek when they leave the room." That's when my grandma chimes in and says, "Oh, that's not OP's friend. He's his boyfriend. Aren't they sweet?" And hearing that, my entitled aunt loses it. She says, "What? You're not serious, are you?" My mom says, "Yes, that's OP's boyfriend. They're an adorable couple, and everyone in the family has been accepting, so you should be too." My aunt is shocked and says, "Everyone else knows except me? Why would you do this to me?" I say to her, "I didn't want to exclude you, but I knew you were going to act like this when I told you. You constantly berate me for not being man enough. Can you blame me for not wanting to tell you?" She replies, "I never meant it. That's how I talk. If you told me, then I would have stopped." My mom says, "No, you wouldn't. He's asked you to stop countless times. So have I. And I'm not having that kind of attitude around my son. He's not going to feel unwelcome in his own family." Entitled Aunt says, "But I'm not trying to make him uncomfortable. I can help him now that I know what the problem is. It's obvious, isn't it? He just hasn't met the right girl yet. He's still a little kid. I'll help set him up with a nice girl. There's tons of lovely girls in the neighborhood who would love a boyfriend like OP." She then turns to me, holds my hand, and smiles at me. And she says, "Doesn't that sound nice? We'll get you a nice girlfriend. A sweet boy like you wouldn't have any problems with girls, right?" I tell her I'm happy the way I am. And she says, "You can't be happy like that, doll, because you're gonna end up dead because of this. People get killed for being like that, you know? I'm only looking out for you." She then looks at my older cousin and says, "If you weren't so obsessed with looking kind, then you'd tell him what he's doing is wrong. I don't want this kind of influence around my daughter." My older cousin tells her, "Then don't bring her to family events then." My aunt totally ignores my cousin and says, "You know there's some places in the world that can help him, right? I've heard of a lot of places that do conversion therapy. I could help you a little to pay for him to get that." At this point, my cousin looks like she's about to punch my aunt into next week, and my mom and grandma are focused on trying to help me calm down because I was on the verge of a panic attack. That's when my aunt points at my mom and says, "You encouraged this. You let him act like this all the time when he was little. He was playing with Barbies and wearing purple all the time." At this point, my grandma chimes in and says, "That's enough. If I hear any more of this nonsense, then you can get your stuff and leave. You're not making my grandson uncomfortable on my watch. If you want to act like a psycho about it, then go to your own house and do it." At that, my aunt looked like she both wanted to slap my grandma and burst into tears. Nothing else was said for the most part. My grandma then pulled me aside and reminded me that she loved me and told me to ignore my aunt. I found out later that my aunt had been telling other family members about me, hoping that they would side with her, but they didn't. She eventually left after a couple of hours, but she made sure to share things online about conversion therapy and how people can be cured, and even gave my number to a few of her friends' daughters and nieces, trying to set me up with them. So that was my story of how my psychotic, entitled aunt found out that I was into guys. I'm surprised she was actually shocked by it. I think everyone in my family saw it coming. My goodness guys, that entitled aunt is pretty darn ridiculous and sounds like a real piece of work. And in my opinion, I think the only one in that room that needs any sort of therapy is the Aunt Karen, don't you think? So this one is a long one, and I promise none of it is boring. I grew up in a cult that believed, among other things, that women were the property of men, and children were the property of parents. So as an unmarried daughter, I was basically a cherished slave. I ran the house, meal planned, cooked, and even homeschooled my youngest siblings, all while trying to homeschool myself through high school. Having grown up my whole life this way, I didn't even know what law would have been on my side if I decided to defy my parents and move out when I turned 18. My parents constantly reminded me that until they gave me away to a husband, I was still their child and I would always obey them, as they were the mouthpieces of God in my life. So one day, my parents told me that they received a phone call from the parents of another family we knew. Their oldest son had noticed me and he wanted permission to court me. So as per protocol, the parents would talk to each other and then they would talk to their kids and arrange the whole thing. My mom was beaming with pride, but I thought about it for a little bit and I said I didn't want to do it. My mom's smile then disappeared, and then she cries and says, "What? Why?" I gave her my reasons, very good ones, I thought. But my mom wasn't satisfied, and she told me I was not allowing God to work in my life, and that I should just obey them and trust that God's will would be done. And being the good girl I was, I relented and said yes. Then followed a week or two of awkward family gatherings between the two houses, because this version of courtship never allowed for the couple to be alone together. I tried to ease the tension by telling funny stories and encouraging other family members to talk, but only received stern rebukes from his mother, who very clearly did not approve of me. Once, she even said, "We don't believe in practical jokes, so we're not impressed by that story." I then mumbled that I wasn't trying to impress them and that they could talk about anything they wanted, but no one did. Another time, I was alone with his mom in the living room, and she states out loud to me, I only had 2 requirements on the girl he chose. Number 1, that she came from a good family, and number 2, that she knew her Bible. And you have both of those, so I'm not gonna say anything. I was confused at feeling so rejected when I didn't even want this in the first place. I mean, really, who was courting who? And then I got a job offer as the church receptionist, and my parents told me that his parents called them again and said they didn't approve of women working outside the home, and they didn't want me to take the job. We believed the same way, except it was after the woman was a mother. Before she had kids, it was up to her father or husband whether she could work or not. This being a single situation where my father allowed it, but the guy I was courting didn't, my parents told me to call him and get his permission too. I thought the phone call went well. He basically said that he wasn't my husband yet, and that I should follow my own family's rules, that he didn't mind and he was okay with it, so I happily accepted the job. The next day, my parents told me that his parents called and they canceled the relationship. Now, it did feel weird to get dumped without ever hearing from the guy dumping me, but it solved my problem. And I moved on a little confused, and definitely not in the mood for anyone else to court me. 2 years later, at 19 years old, I still wasn't married. Shocker. And his family thought that that meant God was saving me for him. The whole scenario repeated itself, but this time, my dad insisted that the guy court him first, so he could decide if he was even good enough for me before my heart got broken again. My dad told them until he made a decision one way or another, he didn't want any of them to contact me and tell me what was going on. The guy decided that no contact couldn't possibly mean letters, so he wrote me a 5-page apology for dumping me 2 years before. He also confessed that he had been falling in love with me all over again, and he wanted to know if it was worth his time to even get to know my dad. My parents saw his name on the envelope and confiscated the letter, before finally deciding that it was too late, and they explained the whole thing. I was honestly insulted that a guy I had barely seen in 2 years would say he was in love with me. We agreed to meet at a local restaurant and agree on the terms of the relationship, and decide if we even want to try it again. I sat on one side of the table with my parents, and he sat on the other side with his parents. It felt like we had lawyers. His dad immediately starts yelling at my dad for denying his son, and saying it was so obvious that I wanted this and he was holding me back. My dad's a quiet man, and he sat there like an angry stone while this man yelled at his face in the middle of the restaurant. It got so heated and embarrassing that the guy who liked me excused himself to the bathroom to throw up. While he was gone, his dad also said if we didn't accept his son, there might never be another guy to come along to marry me. This made me laugh because I wasn't that desperate to just accept the first guy to ask, just because I was scared no one else would. That evening ended up with an agreement that we would pick up where we left off. We thought that meant more courtship, and they thought they already did courtship, so now it was an agreement to get engaged. The mistake quickly revealed itself a few days later, when another friend had emailed my dad himself and asked permission to court me. We'll call this guy number 2. My dad told me that I should tell guy number 1, and ask him if I could stay friends with someone who liked me, but who I rejected. That's when guy number 1 comes up with what I thought was a pretty good plan. My dad would tell guy number 2 that I was already courting someone else, and then I could introduce him to some of my other friends, and maybe he would leave on his own. I thought that was brilliant, and my dad spent the rest of the evening writing a tactful reply to the new guy. Guy number 1 was now aware that I had friends who were not female. Their family believed that guys and girls could never be friends, so I essentially was cheating on him with 20 other guys. So he called me the next morning and asked my permission to ask my dad's permission to ask me to marry him. Basically the lamest over-the-phone proposal ever. He said he was in love with me, but we didn't have to get married right away, but that I would just be his, and have a ring on my finger so no one else could take me away from him. I told him I was flattered, that he thought he loved me, and I wish I could say I loved him back, but I didn't. It had only been 6 days, and I hadn't even decided how I felt about him yet. His voice then changed instantly, and he angrily snapped at me, asking if I was still talking to guy number 2, who also liked me. And at that, I was shocked. I had never seen this side of him before, and that's why it should take longer than 6 days to find a spouse, kids. So I tried telling him that my dad had only just replied to his email, and I hadn't had a chance to introduce him to my friends yet. He then said, that wasn't the plan. We agreed that you wouldn't talk to him anymore. And that's when I shut him down and said, whoa, I'm not doing what you told me to do. We're not engaged yet. I talk to a lot of guys, and it doesn't mean anything romantic. We're just friends. His voice then quiets down, but he sounded bitter and said, well, if you can't agree to not talk to any other guys and only talk to me, maybe we shouldn't call this courting right now. Maybe we shouldn't, I replied. We then agreed that I would take a week to think about it and call him when I had made my decision. I would either marry him and forsake all the male friends I had known since I was 5, or cut the relationship off for the second time. I told my parents what happened, and they tried to convince me to do what he wanted, but I finally yelled at them for the first time in my life that I was not gonna marry anyone that I didn't love. My dad was angry, but my mom sent me to my room and said we could talk about it later. I had a week after all. I was very sad. The only reason I was considering it because my parents insisted it was God's will, and I really wanted to do what God said. But at the same time, this family seemed even more strict than my own, and I would also miss all my old friends. There was so much to think about. About an hour later, I got 2 calls, one from guy number 1's mom, which I let go to voicemail. The next thing I know, my little brother comes up holding the house phone, saying it was guy number 1's mom, and she demanded to talk to me. She scolded me for a long time, saying I had cheated on her son and that he called off work this morning because he was worried sick over calling me. She called me a harlot because of all the guys I was talking to. Well, I tried to tell her that I wasn't in a relationship with any of them. She basically says to me, you cheated on him. You're in a relationship with every person you meet. I say to her, but not every relationship is a romantic one. To which she says, between guys and girls, yes it is. For example, my husband is my best friend, and I would never talk to other men, and neither would your mom. I say to her, oh yes she would. She talks to men all the time, and she's friends with a lot of people. She then replies, well, I'm shocked. I honestly thought she was better than that. She then demanded to know why I needed 7 days to pray about whether or not to marry her son. She said to me, "God doesn't take that long to answer prayer. It sounds like you already know how you feel and you're too scared to say it. It should take a day or 2 at most." I say to her, "Look, your son agreed to let me have a week. If he can't do that, then the answer's no." She then told me that she would go talk to her son and husband and see what they wanted to do. I hung up the phone and I threw it across the room. I had never been accused of anything like that before and I just curled up and cried. That's when my mom heard me and she came to see what was wrong. When I told her everything that horrible woman said to me and stated firmly that I never wanted to see anyone from that family again, she called my dad up and he was angry about me being accused of being a harlot. But he told me that I wasn't allowed to make my decision until a week was up, because that's what I agreed to. I just silently told myself they could all think what they wanted, but I knew my answer was no, and it would still be a no a week from now. He called the family back and told them that none of them were to contact me in any way, shape, or form for the whole week, and when I had made my decision, he would call them and let them know what it was. They were angry, but they never contacted me again. Almost 2 years later, I married the new guy number 2, who emailed my dad. He was not a member of our cult, and he taught me how to think for myself. Our courtship looked a lot more like dating than anything else, and we made a lot of people upset, but we didn't care. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we have 3 sons. I feel like I was rescued. Guys, this story was absolutely insane, and I could not imagine how scary and stressed out OP was just being in a situation like that. Like, just the thought of someone going, "Okay, that's it, you're gonna settle with this person and marry them and be with them until you die," is absolutely insane. I'm just glad it all worked out in the end, guys, and OP's living a good life. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit the thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode, where a Karen boss refuses to let OP take a sick day because she has plans. And OP ends up embarrassing her. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.